Those who endorse colorblind racial attitudes not only turn a blind eye to racism in the modern era but also historically. Take, for instance, Ron Rule, former chief executive officer of As Seen on TV, who asked in a viral post, "How did we get from the 90s to here?" He claimed that nobody cared about race during this decade and divisive politics hadn't permeated everything. Of course, Rule is not alone in his embrace of a nostalgic view of American society, hence the popularity of his post. This narrative provides a clear example of what happens when the experiences of Black people are cast aside and treated as insignificant. There is no decade you can point to in American history where Black people were not impacted by their race. One of the most prominent examples that dispelled the myth that no one cared about race during this era would be the language employed. For instance, during the 1990s, some media reports portrayed Black teenagers and men as more dangerous than other groups to justify the increased police presence in their communities. John DiLilio coined the term in the 1995 article published in the Washington Examiner, "The Coming of the Super Predators," claiming, "The trouble will be greatest in Black inner-city neighborhoods. Other places are also certain to have burgeoning youth city problems that will spill over into upscale central city districts, inner-ring suburbs, and even the rural heartland." DiLilio described Black youths as possessing vacant stares and smiles, and remorseless eyes. Such dehumanizing language employed throughout the 1990s stereotyped Black teenagers and men as more likely to engage in criminal behavior, act irrationally, and even act against their own best interests. Unremorseful is a phrase that suggests Black youth are inherently guilty and that if they did cause harm, they lack compassion for those they presumably wronged. Of course, this characterization helped to justify targeting them. Despite crime levels declining significantly, beginning in the 1990s, for instance, violence and crime dropped by 25% between 1991 to 98, and the rate of incarceration dramatically increased. In just 7 years, there was a 59% increase in state and federal prisoners, and the rate of incarceration increased by 47%. One analysis suggested that the super predator myth caused irreparable harm to a generation of Black youth. The 1992 Los Angeles riots also demonstrate that this decade was racialized. The acquittal of 4 white Los Angeles police officers who severely beat Rodney King, a 25-year-old African American, triggered wide-scale protests. Before the age of smartphones, the public had less access to see police misconduct for themselves. While Black Americans protested police brutality in every generation, white people regularly doubted those experiences. Nevertheless, video footage of police officers attacking King revealed to the public on March 3, 1991, exposed the scourge of police brutality. Releasing police officers who brutally beat a young Black man triggered one of American history's most devastating civil disruptions. Just as many Americans responded to video footage of 46-year-old George Floyd beaten by police officers in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in 2020, the violence inflicted upon Rodney King in 1991 sparked outrage and widespread protests. While members of the Black community saw a painful reminder of police brutality, many white Americans felt shocked at the footage because it challenged the widely held belief that race doesn't matter. Despite their nostalgic view, the 90s were not a time when race did not matter. On the contrary, the racial identity of citizens during this era impacted their health and well-being. According to a report published in the American Journal of Public Health, eliminating racial inequality in health care in the United States would have saved the lives of almost 900,000 Black people from 1991 to 2000. Not only did institutional racism negatively contribute to the lives of Black people, it also contributed to their deaths. Apfelbaum et al., 2012, noted that the Allure of colorblindness is that it seems to offer a relatively simple framework for managing issues of race in contemporary society. Yet, this worldview hinders, rather than facilitates, constructive discourse about race relations, as those who do not believe race matters are not likely to support policies designed to mitigate disparities. Researchers recommended that, as an alternative to colorblindness, individuals and institutions embrace a multiculturalism perspective since it can sharpen their assessments of discrimination. However, they did concede that such an approach was often met with resistance, some from those who feel threatened by inclusion and others for the limitations of this method. For instance, one prominent critique of multiculturalism is its failure to address structural injustices. Depending on its implementation, this pedagogy may be a superficial celebration of diversity compared to anti-racism. Cohen, 2024. Nevertheless, this may be a gateway for those who engage in color evasiveness. While some white Americans believe they are rising above the fray by claiming not to see race, this worldview can cause harm, as it creates an environment where those experiencing racism are ultimately silenced. For example, Jones et al., 2023, revealed that when white students and teachers claimed students had similar experiences regardless of race, they ultimately minimized the impact of racist bullying and silenced discussions of race and racism. In a society where race impacts Black people, it's dismissive to claim that their identity doesn't matter. Researchers noted there was a shift in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, where rhetoric shifted from a colorblind ideology to discussing the systemic nature of racism in the United States. Torreif et al., 2023. There seems to be an ebb and flow where, on one end, some Americans are continuing to embrace colorblind racial attitudes while others are breaking free from that ideology. While some white people claim no one cared about race, during the 1990s, numerous Black people offered a retort that there's never been a time when race did not impact Americans. One Black woman, Melancholy Tiff, shared her view that white people truly live in a different universe. To claim racism didn't persist. Of course, we're all technically living in the same cosmos and the Milky Way galaxy. Yet, her comment reflects the vast gap in racial awareness between these two groups. Knowing that while Black people experienced racism throughout the 90s, some believe this was not happening reveals the significance of including Black narratives in the classroom. The author Zora Neale Hurston once warned, "If you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it." Well, the same can be said about a group of people who are silenced despite trying to describe their pain. There are several reasons some white people endorsed the belief that no one cared about race during the 1990s. As the country has remained de facto segregated in the post-civil rights era, many white people are raised in racially homogeneous communities. While hearing about the experiences of Black people could mitigate some of the disillusionment of colorblind racism, many white people don't have access to these narratives, and few actively seek them out. However, not all white people are merely uninformed. Some intentionally overlook the impact of racism. Neville et al., 2023, suggested colorblind racial attitudes operate as a legitimizing myth used to justify social hierarchies. By claiming not to see race, some oppose policies designed to level the playing field for racial minorities while claiming not to harbor racist attitudes. Nostalgia describes the sentimental feelings someone has toward the past. And there's nothing wrong with fondly remembering the 90s and keeping your CD collection or Tamagotchi. However, having warm and fuzzy feelings about your experiences during the decade doesn't justify efforts to whitewash history. Far too often, nostalgia is used to cling to the myth that things were once less racialized than they are today. As May et al., 2012, noted, in the shared storytelling of this nostalgic past, whites create a present that plays by colorblind rules, while reproducing, reiterating, and strengthening whiteness. So, while there are many reasons why some white people believe the 90s were idyllic, we mustn't use their positive experiences during this era to overlook the difficulties black people faced. This article is shared from media sources to enrich public dialogue and encourage thoughtful discussion.